Alright, time for a little how-to. I'm rebuilding the Motorcraft 4300 that came off the F250. These are pretty common carburetors for Fords. First thing, and this is actually a mistake I made, there are two types of the 4300. This one does not have the tag on it. I believe normally it would be under one of these screws by the inlet here. I did not have that luxury and ordered the wrong kit the first time. So make sure before you order it that you take a close look at this and at your manifold. This particular one is a square bore. Others are a spread bore. Most Rochester carburetors are going to be a spread bore carburetor that I'm familiar with anyway. So that's kind of number one mistake. So when you ID these, make sure you get the right one. I just ordered kind of your basic kit. Comes with all the check balls, pretty much all paper gaskets and new needle and seat, all that good stuff. And I've split the body already, so we're not gonna watch me take this thing apart. But getting set up here, I've got a little magnetic tray just so I don't lose these little clips for the linkages, a couple different size screwdrivers and needle nose pliers in case we need them. Also, make sure to take out your center stud or the thing won't come apart. So let's go ahead and tear into this thing. First thing we're going to do is take the float off, and you can actually tell kind of from the dirt line the float has been sitting a little bit low, so we may adjust that later by actually bending the tangs on this thing. For right now I'm just going to remove it. Pretty easy. There's just a pin right here, comes right out, throw it in the tray. It's brass but won't lose it there. And now we have access to our needle and seat. Now these bits here, your needle should just come right out. If at all possible, use a big screwdriver to try not to mar this thing. Obviously I'm not replacing mine, so not as big of a deal. Oh shoot, yeah, have to get a different tool. I'm kind of doing this the right thing the wrong way with this one. Now you have your needle and seat. I've already pulled the needle out, just drops right in there. So once you pull your float, this thing will just fall off. And be careful not to put pressure on your new one because it will destroy it and leak. Now, your primary needle and seat here is super wide. I actually don't have a screwdriver handy that is wide enough. So if you're doing roadside repairs or whatever, kind of a little tip, use a key. You could also use a washer and a set of pliers. Just anything that's not going to mar this brass too bad, especially on the install. So you definitely want to be careful. Get this thing removed and replace it with a new one. This one's pretty grody. Comes out as easy as that. Now there's also a secondary one here, and this one's a little bit tougher and kind of the same thing. You actually can't remove that needle from it, so the same deal here. Find a key that's got a nice little groove in it. You can bridge that gap right around and actually remove that thing. I'm gonna have to take the squirter off of here, but that kind of needs to be done anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. It may also be important to note there are multiple holes for this squirter or accelerator pump arm. So kind of make note as you're taking this apart, pulling the pin out, if you're going to disassemble it, which hole it was in to begin with. Otherwise it's the adjustment's just going to be off, and perhaps yours is wrong. We'll talk through the adjustment of this thing a little bit later. That little pin just comes right out, and we were in the number one hole there, so that's going to give it about the most leverage mechanical advantage there. So there's your arm for that, the spring, the accelerator pump, and now that that's out of the way, as I was saying, you can see this needle actually doesn't come out. So find a key that's just got a nice little bump in it that'll fit in those grooves, go right over it. So if you don't have the specialty tool for this, like I don't, you can get this thing removed no problem, just using kind of tools that you have on your person, or kicking around the house or whatever. I just had this key from rekeying an old lock set, so easy enough. You'll also want to probably take, and you can see there's from either a previous rebuild or maybe the factory, and whenever there's some sealant on here, you'll want to go ahead and remove the brass brush or brass pick. Just don't use anything steel on here. You don't want to mar the aluminum and ruin it. So now we've got all those apart. I won't be taking the secondaries off or the choke completely. They operate pretty freely, and I'm just going to clean them up with carb cleaner and not turn this into a billion pieces. But if you are having issues with these sticking, definitely worthwhile to take these pins out, pull all your little screws apart, linkages as well, and just make sure everything operates freely. Not really my issue, so we won't be doing that. On to the next piece. One little item before I jump to the carb base. I just tore off this Excel pump, and the diaphragm actually looks okay. I've got a new ethanol resistant blue one here, but I would suspect this has probably never been replaced. I'm starting to pry this off, and you can see the thing is just completely cracking apart. Could be part of the responsiveness issue with this carburetor. This thing is actually just completely wasted from years of use and sitting in ethanol. So these should be very pliable in your fingers. Always replace them when you have this thing apart, because they are prone to fail, especially if they're not kind of a more ethanol friendly, like a Viton or some sort of material like this. So just kind of pop the spring apart so you can get your fingers on it, and make sure to replace that diaphragm every time you replace one of these. Alright, next thing, I've got everything kind of loose. Taking apart the base. Now there's a check ball right there you want to pop out. Don't lose that. There's also a brass plunger right here, which should hopefully pop out when we flip the base over. If not, you can actually use compressed air to blow it through. It's from our passage for the squirter, or the Excel pump right here. I already pulled it loose, but there's this little retainer spring in the bottom, and you've got one more check ball right at the bottom of the squirter here. You can see the orifice at the very bottom down to this side. So just make sure not to drop any of these. My carb rebuild kit actually came with them, but you may have to clean and reuse them. They're just a steel ball. Other thing, carb rebuild kit doesn't come with new jets or anything here, but I'm going to go ahead and take these both out here and just clean the passages through. Use a good wide screwdriver. If you don't have one, you probably don't want to take these apart, because marring them or getting the threads messed up on these, they are brass. They're very, very easy to damage. Sorry, they're very easy to damage, so just be gentle. The other thing we've got here is your power valve, which is just going to kind of basically, when you're not at idle, allow more fuel out of the float bowls and into the engine. So number one, to make sure this piece operates freely, I'm going to go ahead and take it apart and clean it. That's also going to be operated by this plunger here, so I'm not taking it apart. Mine operates okay. We'll just spray it off, but make sure that is clean, and to just make sure, again, like all your other orifices on here do get sprayed off with carb cleaner and wiped down really well. If you're doing something a little more in depth, you can pull these apart, but this is just a vacuum operated return for your power valve. So just make sure this isn't going to stick open and prevent your power valve from opening. So the only other tool you'll need really is a 3/8 deep well socket. You can just slip right around here and just carefully thread this from the base. Again, being gentle when you uninstall and reinstall it. It's just brass, and these threads are very fragile. So once you're through this, like I said, the brass, it's maybe not going to work for us. So if you can't get this brass weight out, you can actually just use compressed air or hydraulic pressure. You just put some mineral spirits in here and actually just use the Excel pump we rebuilt earlier to just force it right on out. Obviously this thing's a little stubborn, so I'm going to have to employ one of those two tricks to use this actual passage for the Excel pump to push it out. Okay, now that the power valve and the main jets are out, last thing to do is peel off your base gasket, noting that this tab actually goes between your idle air mixture screws when you reinstall, and just pull out the half dozen screws here so we can disassemble the base from the float bowls and spray everything out. Other item to tear apart is your choke here. It might be mechanical like this one or electric. There are a couple different versions, but there is a set of gaskets that goes along with them, and I'll show you how to actually adjust this when I reassemble. Let's rip it apart. Right. There you have it. screws to drop out. Now we can spray everything off and get to readjusting and reassembling. Took everything outside, hit it with a gasket scraper and a brass brush. I recommend not using steel just to make sure you don't mar any of the softer brass pieces or aluminum of the body. I keep my gaskets for this step just because I like to make sure and match, bearing in mind obviously that this could have been built incorrectly in the past. You can see there's a couple of different body gaskets. This is the one I've selected. You'll notice that it has some additional provisions here, but I always like to make sure to line these up on the base and the body before I install them. So noting that between these two different upper or lower gaskets here, between the float bowls and the base, this one actually covers these ports here, and the other option does not. So while they both might fit, this unit was actually made by Autolite and Motorcraft. So pay very careful attention. You're going to end up having fuel or massive vacuum leaks that cause the unit to not work. So just kind of a tip on that. So once you've got your right gasket selected, you can just slip it with these two spots on the float bowls here. Go ahead and start reinstalling. Next thing, I noticed tearing down my unit for the choke. This is a manual choke. It didn't actually have a gasket, and this thing is actually hooked up to the intake manifold for a heat and vacuum reference. So I'm going to go ahead and throw one of the gaskets in, kind of guessing, but based on the travel of the choke linkage here, we're going to want this one, and it has a hole punched in it for this heat reference here that is kind of blocked off by the linkage. So just go ahead, slip this puppy in. You can kind of see there's that port is referenced off the manifold right there. All that's left to do then is to install linkage, make sure it operates freely, and throw the cover back on. Okay, now that the base is reassembled, we have a couple things to put back on the lid. We have our needle and seat, and then our secondary here. We'll put the float back on, and we'll need to reinstall the squirter and, if necessary, adjust it. So first things first, we'll get our new seat. Couple of things, make sure you have your washer, your retainer on here, and if necessary, again, running some wire or like a bread tie through it just to make sure all your ports are clean. And being careful in the installation of this thing, as they are brass, and a lot of these parts are very easy to cross thread or mar, so it's important that your threads are clean and everything is very carefully installed. Now there is a difference from the old to the new one. You'll notice this is square, so I'm just going to grab the pliers to go ahead and tighten that up when I'm done. But the height is the exact same on both. So they are the same part, same bore. Should all be pretty universal. Same as our uninstall. As I've said, this needle is not removable from the secondary needle here. So I'm just going to use a house key to get it torqued back down. It doesn't really take a whole lot of force to strip them, so it doesn't really take much of a specialty tool to snug this down. I just like to use what I have around. Alright, we've got the carburetor completely reassembled. One little lesson, I heard a little click when I got this back together. The brass rod that retains the float had actually fallen out. So you may want to mar the end of that with pliers, or just kind of tweak it a little bit to make sure that thing does not fall out. You don't want that going through your carburetor. There are 2 clips. There's just a small retaining clip here, and I had to put an E-ring down on the choke linkage as well, and went ahead again and just verified that everything operates smoothly and as expected. So it looks like with the new fuel filter installed, we're all ready to throw it back on the truck. Thanks for watching.